Okay, please bear with me. This is my first attempt at a video review, so there's bound to be some glitches. But here's how the OWON came packaged, basically. It's double boxed, although it's not really a hefty 2 boxes. But adequate, I think. Outer box, inner box. Cute little box for display, although it's kind of funny. It's a kind of box that was developed for any of the scopes. So it says bandwidth 60 megahertz to 300 megahertz. So if you saw this sitting on a shelf in a shop, you might think, wow, it goes to 300 megahertz. Instead of the fact that they're talking about the entire line. So inside the box, that's what it looks like. Fairly protected. You've got the standard USB power cord. And the scope, little booklet. I already took the probes out. They were in here along with the disc and the manual, an actual printed manual, although the manual again looks like something we all were cranking out on our laser printers 15 years ago. But anyway, there is an actual printed manual. Scope itself. There we go. Now the scope did come with a piece of plastic on here, which I peeled off, so there was a protection on the display. It also came with these little B and C covers, which I popped off the 2-channel inputs, but I've left on the external trigger. So here are the probes that came with the OWON scope. As I mentioned in my post on EEV blog, I'm going to be comparing this to the Rigol, or is it Rigol? I have no idea. DS 1052E because, well, for 2 reasons. That's the only other DSO I've ever owned, and I just had one for a month testing it out and returned it to go for this. It's not completely fair since this costs about 18% more than the Rigol, but since it's the only thing I can compare it against, that's what I'm doing. I don't have the Rigol anymore, so I can't compare it directly. But right off the bat, these probes feel much nicer than the Rigol ones. They feel heftier. The compensation adjustment is here as opposed to, I believe on the Rigol it was on the handle. Instead it's on the actual jack itself. And the main thing, I guess, is one thing that was driving me crazy with the Rigol was that the little 10 times 1 time switch was really easy to throw, and I was constantly knocking it to the wrong setting and not realizing it later till I was measuring. And this one is very solid, has a nice click, and it won't be easy to do that with. The wire feels heftier. They just feel better and more solid in pretty much every respect. I mean, the various attachments you get are the same, of course, and these are rated for 100 megahertz as opposed to the Rigols, which I believe are 60. So basically I wanted to look at the build quality of this in this section of the review. I actually was surprised. It's a bit better than I was expecting after things I'd read about the OWON other products online. The layout is more or less standard in a lot of other DSOs. I am a big fan of the separate vertical controls for the 2 channels as opposed to the Rigol. It had just 1 set of vertical controls and you had to constantly swap to get on the right channel, and you often forgot and you tended to move the wrong channel. I'm not a big fan of having the trigger menu button here and the knob here as opposed to the other way around to keep them in line, but I suppose some companies do that to keep it separate from the horizontal and vertical position controls for the channels. Other than that, the layout is rather standard, although this has basically 2 rows of menu keys, which we'll get into more when we start looking at the firmware. This is real handy for some things and a pain in the ass for the others, but again, I'll get into the strengths and weaknesses of that later. As noted before in another online review, there seems to be a little IR LED here, as if they're thinking about the possibility of making remote controllers for these devices. I'm not quite sure how that'd be used, but anyway, that's sitting there. Other than that, the front is, you know, rather unremarkable, except for the fact of that giant 8-inch display, which, by the way, does have anti-glare coating on it, which is great. I mean, the display in general is very beautiful. both off and on. Now going around the side, let's look at the various connectors and whatnot. Here you see this empty LAN port for the LAN, which OWON was advertising online as coming with these models, but they haven't managed to implement it yet, so it's not here. This is labeled as COM/monitor, but it looks like a standard SVGA or VGA, connector to me, so I'm not sure how you get RS-232 signals out on it. I haven't seen any data that would explain that yet, or if that's possible. We'll get into the VGA output later when we start looking at the firmware again. It has the typical host and device USB connectors here. The other side has the AC power in. It has a little fuse holder and pop out, and it has the master power switch. There's another power switch on top. The reason I guess they've divided it is if you have the battery installed, you can have it turned on and charging the battery, but keep the display and the rest of the unit turned off. The battery compartment is here. I have not bought the optional battery yet, although that is a great feature to have, and it's one of the reasons I was interested in this. One obvious design flaw here is that this thing weighs, it has a very good heft to it for the size. It feels good, a good weight for its size. It's heavy enough to not float around too much, but not too light that it feels somehow cheaply made. But adding the battery obviously is going to add weight to it. So clearly, if you do have a battery, sometimes you want to use it and sometimes you don't. If you're going to an on-site job where there's plenty of AC available and you don't have to worry about the battery, you might want to leave it out just to leave out the weight of carrying it. But the battery compartment itself is attached with very long screws. So here's the battery compartment with the screws loosened and the block being taken out. This obviously is just a kind of insert when there's no battery there. Battery does not go inside it. I'm not sure, since I don't have a battery, I assume it attaches the same way with two screws that go in these holes. Personally, just in terms of speed and swapping to battery usage and not, I probably would have preferred some kind of clip there as opposed to screws. But perhaps for over time, the screws are more reliable. So the back has only the pass-fail trigger output and a ground lug here. I'm not a big fan of the connectors on the sides of devices as opposed to the back. I guess I understand from a design point of view the reason OWON did it was because obviously the main PCB in this is mounted parallel to the front panel as opposed to perpendicular. So I suppose that's the reasoning. I'm not a huge fan, like I said, but maybe it's a small price to pay for the thin size, I'm not sure. Again, it feels quite solidly made. It feels, there's no flex in the unit at all. Feels well built for the most part. It does, by the way, have a fan inside. Probably a lot of people were wondering about that. The fan is very quiet, as it should be. The Rigol had a horrible fan, and that alone was one reason I was constantly thinking about getting rid of it. It really was, I've got 3 computers running here, and that Rigol fan was louder than all 3 combined. I'm not sure if that comes through at all. It is really whisper quiet. You don't know there's a fan there unless you put your ear right up to the thing or feel a small amount of air moving out of it. We can look better at the knobs because I wanted to go over these a little bit. Generally speaking, they feel reasonably okay. The smaller turn knobs here feel a little bit iffy. And I've noticed when I've been using this for the last few days now, that I sometimes hear a little noise as if these things are already starting to, run into ever so slight problems. So I'm not sure about those. What's interesting, one thing that's interesting is that all of the knobs on here are clearly knobs that have switches installed, although they're only using the switches on those 5 knobs and not the larger ones, which is a shame because they don't have the coarse and fine control for vertical and horizontal position as Rigol does. And that I kind of miss already. There's just a coarse control and nothing else. These knobs, the menu select knobs, sorry, buttons I should say, you know, you can tell from the sound of them. I mean, there are these little membrane, cheapo membrane switches that anyone who's, you know, made any PCBs is, you know, are well aware of. Generally, it's okay, but you'll notice, first of all, these are all mounted on a separate PCB, which is slightly floating there. So if I hope that camera picks that up. If I wobble this a little bit, you see them all wobbling. So that's a little kind of shoddy looking. But you know, more so than that, they've got it mounted so close to the display in such a way that when you're clicking them sometimes you're causing a little bit of a disruption to the LCD display. Let's see if we get that. You see that? Some kind of close mounting right there at the edge is causing disruption, which I don't think should really happen. Again, clicking there, I'm getting a little bit of wobble in the display there. The other thing, hang on, this obviously has the feet which tilt the display. The other thing, because some of the knobs and buttons are so stiff, on a slightly slippery desktop like this, pushing them, these are not a problem because of the angle they're mounted at, and they're near the bottom where the rubber feet are. But for example, these, I can't click them without shoving the display around. Same with the push knobs on here. So you have to come in with a hand behind to switch these. That's not a big deal, but you know, still, they're maybe a little stiffer than they ought to be for perfect usability.